Hey, Michael Church, Crawl Space Ninjas. Today I'm with Pat Hartshorn, and he is in the great state of Alaska. And I'm going to let him introduce himself because he's got a lot of great information for us. But I asked Pat to be on this video with us today because, there's a lot of cold weather climates out there that I am not familiar with. And I thought, well, who better to have on here than someone who is familiar with indoor air quality and VOCs and molds, that actually lives in one of the coldest areas in the great United States. So, Pat, I appreciate you coming on here with us and looking forward to what you have to share with us.
Thank you.
Well, tell us a little bit about, you, who you are, and what you do. First of all, I didn't know there were crawl spaces in Alaska, and you sent me picture proof, so I'm looking forward to showing the audience some of those pictures you sent me. But tell me some of the struggles and things you're running into there in Alaska.
Well, my name is Pat Hartshorn. I'm work as an indoor environmental consultant here. I have since 2004, so 19 something years. I will admit most of my jobs are crawl spaces because that is where we have a large amount of our problems with indoor environmental for the entire house. But a lot of them start with crawl spaces. I have studied and practiced as best as I can to stay on top of modern standards when it comes to building science, indoor environmental, remediation, things of that sort. So I oversee remediation projects for like the owners, confirming that remediation companies do a good job and all that kind of stuff, that they follow industry standards. That's a majority of what I do. And when you say about crawl spaces, Alaska is sectioned out. We have crawl spaces here. I'm in South Central, so I'm outside of Anchorage and Wasilla, but South Central is the most populated area, but 90 probably something percent of the homes here do have crawl spaces. Pardon me. And the ones that don't, very seldom do you see skirting. You do in the wet soil areas. So like Anchorage has some swampy areas, and you'll see post and beam with skirting, but most of them are full-blown foundations, either block or poured concrete. And then outside of that is slab on grade. And I'll admit, I'm sitting here in my office in my house and I'm sitting on slab on grade because my work is crawl spaces, and I will build a house with a crawl space, luckily, because due to my experiences, I wouldn't do it. I built this house in 2019 and 20, and yeah, all slab. Our crawl spaces, I would say, have some unique factors to them because of the cold climate part. Alaska Housing Finance Corporation kind of runs the rules of the road around here as far as what we do with crawl spaces. Not that everybody follows them, because if you're not funded under Alaska Housing for your project, you're not required to meet their standards. So if you're just building from a standard bank loan, a conventional bank loan, and you're not looking for a star rating, you're not looking for, they call it PUR 101 or 102, then you don't have to follow their standards. And unfortunately, those are guys that will build to minimal code, which, as you know, code is kind of the minimum.
Right.
And they won't do any enhancements for cold climate necessarily. Some do. There's custom homes out there that they're spec'd out that way. And we offer a service where we do construction coaching for clients for ventilation, crawl space insulation, vapor barrier sealing, all that crawl space ventilation and house ventilation. But it's not super popular, if you will, because it all costs money, and people just don't like to put out any more money than they have to build something. So it seems to be on those things. But as you go north of South Central Alaska and you start getting into what they refer to as the bush, which is the tundra type areas, you don't have crawl spaces. North of Fairbanks, especially, I would say the west coast and the north of Fairbanks, the North Slope area, pretty much, I don't think there's any crawl spaces up there that I've ever experienced. There are some places that have basements, believe it or not, but they're very, very old homes, and they suffer because they were built in areas where the ground changes constantly, and it's all permafrost. So
Right.
It becomes a huge issue. So a majority of crawl spaces are here, and then Southeast Alaska has crawl spaces as well, but again, it's mixed. There's a lot of skirting, piling, a lot of homes on just post and beam, if you will, which is piling down there. So there's not a ton of that. And then of course in the tundra, they can't build right on the ground because of the permafrost issues. So they build with mostly piling, or they have these really fancy adjustable pipe foundation systems. I don't have a photo one with me. I'll send you a photo later you could use, but they're basically a grid of pipes underneath the building designed by, I believe, the Cold Climate Center out of Fairbanks. And they're adjustable. So your house can be adjusted every spring so that you can try to keep it as level as possible.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a pretty elaborate system. If you use piling, a lot of places like look up the Nome Hospital building, and you will see where they put all these piling in and built this huge building. But if you look right alongside every piling is a smaller pipe with a set of radiator looking fins on top. And those actually absorb heat out of the ground and displace it so that the ground will stay frozen, so the piling won't move.
Oh, wow.
They're actually, the pipeline's kind of built that way.
Hmm.
You know, they had to keep the ground frozen. You introduce a steel pipe and you get 80 degrees up above, that heat's going to transfer.
Right.
So they have to do things, you know. So there's a lot that goes into that. But crawl spaces, yes, South Central, that's the majority of Alaska. We have less than 1 million people up here. I think we're about 800,000 in the whole state. And I would say not half, but darn near half of the population is right here in South Central.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And that's where the majority of these crawl spaces are at.
One of the interesting things I found whenever you and I first talked was it seems like that crawl spaces, whenever they're encapsulated, will hold the heat in. And can you share that with us? Because I can only imagine what cold you feel up there. I don't even want to guess. So if you could tell us, outside temperatures versus encapsulated crawl space temperatures, because even here in Knoxville and in the South, people are like, oh, well, if I encapsulate my crawl spaces, are going to keep my pipes from freezing, and it barely gets like in the teens here. So please share with us a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
But on the cold factor, to be honest, I get it all the time because there's a lot of people that live up here from like Minnesota, Michigan. Yes, Minnesota gets just as cold as we do, and sometimes even colder for a few days. That's what I always say. We have winter, and then we have thaw season for about a month and a half, 2 months, and then we have winter again. So it's cold here a lot. We see, so at my cabin I've seen 40 below. Here at the house in Wasilla, I think we've seen about 32 below as a kind of a cold temperature area. But I've been places in Alaska. I went moose hunting one time at 54 below zero. That's more up towards Fairbanks, and so we do get those colds. Our crawl spaces, if you're following the Alaska housing standards, are insulated at the foundation, and we do not have insulation in the floor. Now there's some exceptions to that, but for the most part, we don't insulate the floors. We insulate both the outside and the inside of the foundation wall if it's done full-blown standards based for the Alaska housing stuff. On the outside will be, of course, foam boards. A lot of times, like my house here, even with the slab on grade, I've got 18-inch deep footings. And then I've got, I think it was 16 inches down, if I remember right. There's 4 foot of foam board going out from the foundation at an angle. And that helps the drive not come down around my footings underneath, and it helps the heat from underneath my footings not get out and thaw out the ground around my house. So that's an exterior part. And then also my footings are lined with foam. If I had a crawl space, I would then also have, I prefer spray foam, but I would also have backed insulation hanging on the walls on the inside of the crawl space. And normally you see either R19 or R21. I think Alaska Housing's minimum is R19 on the inside, or maybe that's for the total, but I think most insulation is purchased based on price, because 19 and 21, if one of them's on sale, that's what you're going to get in your house. Probably that's what the builder is going to get.
So they're installing fiberglass on the interior of the walls. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So if you have a concrete wall,
right,
and then they're hanging fiberglass bats hanging down from basically the sill plate on top of the concrete down. Kind of a trick to get them secured there. It works. It's tricky sometimes. Some guys, they'll squish them in and staple them, which I don't like it when they do that. Other guys will put in some sort of a ledger board or something up there that they can staple up to along the bottom of the floor joist. And then they're insulating the rim joist. A lot of guys do backed insulation on the rim joist. We push really heavy to have foam on the rim joist. You're getting your air seal and your insulation all at the same time. A lot of foams, though, sometimes you get into that ignition source part, so you do have to put batt insulation over that foam.
Right.
One of the huge mistakes I see regularly is chopping up a bunch of batt insulation and shoving it in that rim joist pocket and piling it all in there. Well, you went from, let's say they had R19 down to what? You compress insulation, you lose your R value.
Yeah, I use the analogy of, I've seen people, we have a 2x4 stud walls, right? And I've seen people take R19, which is 6 inches, and shove it in a 4-inch cavity. Well, you just made it R13, because that's what's designed to go in there. So you squeezing it and pushing it takes the air out of it, which makes the R value. So you're supposed to let it have that air in there. So I'm really interested that they put have you ever seen like where moisture is compromised, that fiberglass that's in the crawl spaces, or is that an issue that you have to deal with there?
So there's been practices over the years where some builders, and some still do, and we ask that it be taken down, like if we have to do a remediation. Some builders will hang the vapor barrier over the fiberglass bats on the walls, or they'll just hang loose plastic down over the fiberglass bats. That, in our theory, is not a good idea, because if you get condensation on the foundation, you want it to be able to the insulation to still be able to breathe a little bit if it can. Let that condensation migrate out. Right. Because in theory, we have a humidity controlled ventilated crawl space. So let that moisture into the crawl space so that the ventilation system can take it out. There's also guys who are running plastic up that wall before they put the bats up, and they're sealing that plastic at the top of the foundation, right at the top sill plate almost, and then they're tying it into their floor vapor barrier, and that becomes one wrap. So from sill plate to sill plate, all the way across, one wrap of plastic. I think a lot of those are the ones where they have more moist areas and they're only using damp proofing on the outside of the foundation, and they know they're going to get seepage. And so they're controlling that moisture and keeping it under a vapor barrier.
So for us, that would be an encapsulation. So they're basically encapsulating the crawl space from foundation wall to foundation wall, and then putting the fiberglass over the plastic versus trapping the fiberglass between the plastic and the foundation wall.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's another part on Alaska housing standards is 2 and/or 4 feet of insulation actually laying from the footing out into the crawl space on the vapor barrier on the floor. And that, again, that's that hot air trying to prevent warm interior air from driving under the footings, or exterior cold air from driving into the crawl space. You don't see that all the time, but that is part of an energy rating.
Well, I got 2 things I want to ask you about. Number one, how do you feel about insulating the floor of the crawl space? Do you ever see that? Because we get that a lot, and I'm thinking that's not necessary, but I'd like to get your opinion on that. If you got a really cold climate, like you said, in Minnesota, Wisconsin, your area, is there any advantage to insulating the floor of the crawl space?
Outside of that 2 to 4 feet, I don't see where most insulations would be of benefit. You're into the warm area of the house, which is keeping the soil's temperature at a comfortable temperature, if you will. If you ever had moisture intrusion, that would be a mess. So I don't know for sure that would be a benefit, but I think I mentioned to you in a conversation, there's these guys proposing spray foam from sill plate to sill plate and across the floor. And literally when you climb down your crawl space, you would be walking on the spray foam. I have mixed feelings about that. Sure, that's a great vapor barrier. Wow. I mean, you're sealed, but it also could be detrimental if you ever had groundwater come up or something like that. I'm not quite sure how that would handle all that.
Because you'd have to rip it all out to put some kind of water management system or whatever down in there.
You would think so. I mean, you could cut a hole and put a sump pump in or something like that, I suppose. But most of our areas are pretty dry. I mean, like we have very gravelly soil, and the Palmer area is really gravelly soil, so it's not too bad. But like Anchorage is horrible. It's a bowl. It's really wet. But I don't see where the cost to do full insulation across the floor has enough benefit to it to make it a feasible practice. I don't see where that benefit would be. And I'll ask the cold climate guys about that, because that's an interesting thought. I mean, I know they go 2 and 4 feet in already, but they stopped there and they did that study. So there's
Right.
got to be a reason behind that.
Well, the other thing you bring up, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you do VOC testing and all that sort of stuff. Is that correct?
Yeah,
How I'm sorry, go ahead.
VOC and MVOC combination testing.
Okay. Please explain what that is. I know what it stands for, but I'd like for you to explain what that is. And how do you see spray foam coming into that? Because I have seen comments on our YouTube channel that VOCs can cause some respiratory problems, especially those that off gas. So what can a consumer do to make sure they're getting a good spray foam, if you will, versus, one that could potentially off gas for long term, in your opinion?
We're only using closed cell poly spray foam up here, which is heavy off gassing at first, or if you have to. So for instance, my house is 5.5 inches. I spray foamed this entire place 5.5 inches thick. But then I had to go back and face that so that my drywall, because it's not perfectly flat because it's sprayed foam. And I had to go back and face all my 2x and make sure my drywall would fit flush. Spraying the foam insulation wasn't that bad. I didn't notice it as much then. When I ground that stuff flat on the 2x, oh man, that was strong. I don't understand that difference there. I'm not privy to that foam, the chemical aspect there. But I have tested lots of houses on VOC side because people are scared of the foam.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had issues after the fact, except for I know 2 homes where we had VOC results that indicated the foam was possibly a cause, and they went back and they opened up walls, and we had the best way I can explain it is really dark sections of foam. It wasn't applied properly.
Gotcha.
And it was still off gassing, if you will. It had a horrible odor to it. But those homes were very specific. We were there because of the odor. Something was wrong. And there's a lot of foam houses around here. There's a big spray foam company here, does a lot of foam. I mean, they do everything from lifting houses with foam. They lift foundations with foam. They now have a product where they can poke a hole in your foundation wall, then they spray it through the hole, and it travels along the outside of your foundation and reseals it when you have a leak. It's a up and coming thing, I think, to use more and more foam. And I know some people are scared of it because there's a lot of articles out there about, the dangerous foam in your house. I have no issues, and I have VOC tested my house quite a few times. I use my house for a little study ground. And I don't have any issues with it. Even in a crawl space, it's not even closed in, it's exposed rim joist. And after about the 3rd day, you don't notice the odor anymore. That doesn't mean it's gone, but you don't notice the odors anymore. So those volatile organic compounds, think of them as the smells in the air, the new car smell, all those things, the VOCs, the off-gassing, the releasing of the compounds from materials, where the MVOC is more specific to, depends upon who you talk to, microbial or mold volatile organic compounds. They've been able to kind of separate those out. And so when we do sampling, we're focusing usually on the MVOC part, but our lab also gives us the VOC results. And that has been beneficial at times. We're looking for potentially, off-gassing, growing active mold that we can't see. That's kind of why we do the MVOC testing, the VOC testing.
Is the MVOC more related to the mycotoxins that mold create? Is that what you're kind of looking for in the MVOC, or is mycotoxin something different than an MVOC?
My understanding is, because this is a very controversial subject in the industry, my understanding is mycotoxins are basically a gas. VOCs are a compound. So they are different, but they're together. So we don't have a method of testing for mycotoxins in the air. So if you test for VOCs, MVOCs, and you find them, well, you have mycotoxins there. The other consensus in the industry, I think it's a consensus in here, I hope it is, if you do proper mold remediation, you're cleaning up spores and roots and fragments and all those things. You're removing those things from the building. And in that process, through the HEPA filtration and the negative airs and all those, you are removing the mycotoxins and the MVOCs. Those are going to go away also, is the kind of the understanding there. The only other place we use VOC testing is we're required to use it for clearances on methamphetamine remediation jobs.
Okay.
We're required to do that because they don't, they don't want chemicals left behind that don't show up in a methamphetamine test. They don't want all those chemicals from like potential cooking or something like that, or from cleaners, because that's such a heavy cleaning process. You know, if you use the wrong cleaners, you can make a house basically unhealthy, if you will, by dousing it in, you know, high chemical cleaners. They're supposed to use natural stuff, green stuff on that.
Sure. So if I heard you correct, and I want to finish up this spray foam segment because this is a fascinating subject in VOCs. If I heard you correctly, you mainly deal with closed cell spray foam there. When properly applied and cured, you normally don't find VOCs. You would if you were to cut into it. It tends to off-gas VOCs. It's almost like you're disturbing it.
Opening up those cells, I think.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that if it's applied incorrectly, so for those of you that don't know, normally if you buy a froth pack is what they call it, you get an A and a B, and you have to control how much A and how much B. Well, if that mixture's off,
yeah,
you can squirt more of one than the other, and may not even cure. It could just be like a wet liquid in there, right? So that's also an off gasser. You found that in another home that you tested where it wasn't mixed properly and had an issue with the install. Is that right?
Yep. And I'll send you some pictures of it because I've got one of my sheds outside where the machine messed up on me while I was working, and I used a large commercial machine in a big huge trailer, and I went out there and used that shed as a practice place to get some errors fixed, and it did that.
Okay.
And I'll send you pictures of what it looks like.
Well, and to be fair, there are some people that are so sensitive to indoor air pollution that they're off the chart. Like they couldn't even be in a carpet store, for example, or something. So there's that extreme of sensitivity, but we're talking about the average, person in their home. They probably won't notice any VOCs using spray foam as long as it's one like we use the ICP. And it's the Green Guard. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's the one that's it off gases for an hour. That's the where you got to have everybody out of the house for an hour after you're done. And some are 24 hours, some are 48 hours. So as long as you follow the manufacturer guidelines, you should be okay. Is that
correct?
A good way to say it?
We're using the closed cell because we can't afford moisture absorption. So a lot of the other foams, they can absorb moisture. We can't have that. So that's pretty much why we're using the closed cell. When you get 20, 30, 40 below outside and 70 nice moist inside, you don't want that foam to be able to absorb anything.
Right. Versus a Denver, for example, where it's super low humidity and all that sort of stuff. They could do open cell or whatever they wanted to. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I've seen it here a few times. There's some guys that sprayed open cell, and I remember a warehouse I went to, and it was a mess. Just with the humidity in the air, it was a mess.
So just to be clear, you're not anti-open cell. You're just not. You just don't like open cell in Alaska, is what you're saying. Correct. Is that right? All right. Because some people, hey, he said he hated open cell. So I just want to make sure.
As this place.
That's right. Tell me again about the temperature. Closed crawl space versus negative 56 degrees outside, I think you said. What are you seeing the temperatures inside of these crawl spaces on average? Are they still holding some pretty good temperatures in there?
Yeah, I would say in the dead of winter, an average crawl space that has so don't forget, a lot of our houses, about 75% of our houses are furnaces, and a large forced air furnace, and a large portion of those furnaces are in the crawl space. So that's your warmer crawl space just by displacement. But a lot of houses, those furnaces might be in the garage or something like that, but all the ducting is in the crawl space.
Gotcha.
They stay plenty warm. They don't need additional heat. I'd say 64, 65 degrees, something like that in the dead of winter, your crawl space is still plenty warm. As long as somebody doesn't have passive venting installed, that of course they leave open, that is a cold intake. That's where you start seeing the frozen pipes, and it's usually right there where that vent is, but our crawl spaces stay plenty warm. We do not like to see any additional heat added to the crawl space by opening up the ducting and providing a supply register or a return register. That to us is cross-contamination between the crawl space and the house through the heating system. When that heating system is off, it might not cross-contaminate while it's running because maybe you just have a supply in the crawl. but we don't see the need for that because when that heating system is off, that is a direct air path right to the house. So you're running your range hood, you're doing something else, you're pulling crawl space air. Now our crawl spaces are called semi-conditioned. And if they're done correctly with a sealed vapor barrier, proper ventilation for moisture control, et cetera, they are a pretty comfortable environment down there. But they're still not a fully conditioned environment like your house. They don't have bathroom exhaust fans going. They don't have those things. They have a humidistat controlled bathroom fan down there, but it only runs when there's humidity. So there's not other ventilation going on. Pardon me. So yeah, I don't know. I don't see where additional heat is necessary. The guys with boilers in the houses, they're usually where they drop through the floor from one register and then come up to another register. They'll throw in little sections of fins there, heat register fins. And that is more than enough, again, to keep the crawl space plenty warm because you're super insulated on the walls. So you boxed it in, if you will. And a proper vapor barrier, the moisture from the floor can't add to the crawl space air, changing that temperature differential,
right.
Makes it uncomfortable.
So if I hear you correctly, no amount of insulation is going to keep a crawl space from freezing without some sort of heat source. Is that right?
Correct.
So those houses that maybe don't have ductwork going through them, and I assume there's not any based on what you're telling me in Alaska, but if you had a well insulated crawl space in Alaska and you didn't have the heat ducts going through there, it's going to get cold because there's nothing there to add to that heat. So your heating system is leaking a little bit of heat into the crawl space, and if it's poorly insulated, that heat will escape more rapidly. But since you insulate them so well, it holds that heat in the crawl space. Is that right?
Yeah, and it wouldn't be leakage. It would be is it conduction? It's just the heat coming off of the ducting. The metal ducting is so warm that it just keeps the crawl space warm. We don't want leakage. We actually shoot for 100% seal of all the ducting in the crawl space. Again, you don't want a Venturi sucking air in on the supply side or the return side. The air's coming out. You don't want air transfer between the two spaces. If you need makeup air for your furnace, you want to have a damper going to the exterior and pull in fresh air. That's which I think is required on. But yeah, we don't want leakage, if you will. In areas where it's so cold and the crawl spaces don't have the ability to have the insulated walls correctly, those are ones where they do the box insulated floor. So they literally, so my cabin is that way. So my cabin is more of a skirted system, and the floor, I think I used 2x12s, if I remember right. And then we just fill that entire cavity full of insulation, and any plumbing is run along the top of that, on the warmer side, if you were right underneath the subfloor. Then they're boxed in, and that's how the villages are. That's how the houses on pilings and all them, they have a box insulated floor. I dug into one in a village here recently. We had a water damage that went down through that floor system. That's the disadvantage of that. If you get a leak inside the house, you got this boxed insulated floor. And I think in the end, we determined it was R38 insulation, and that it was like a 2-foot deep box, because they're really trying to super insulate those things and keep the plumbing up on the top.
So what do they do? Put it like a plywood on the bottom side? Is that what you mean by boxed?
Yeah, you're basically covering in the bottom of the floor joist. On that house, it was metal roofing was screwed to the bottom of the floor joist.
Okay, I got you.
And then they lay the insulation all the way up through, pack it tight, and then they run the plumbing right on top, bedded in the insulation, and then they put the subfloor down.
Okay, very good. Very good. Well, this is fascinating. I'll be honest with you. I'm learning a lot from you. And, unfortunately, in our climate, we do have leaking ducts, so we're pulling air in from the crawl space because we've got central heat and air, which I had the privilege to go to Madison, Wisconsin, and I got to see a boiler installed in a house. I'm not used to seeing boilers and all that stuff up there. So I was like, wow, this is fascinating. There's like water running everywhere inside this place, so it was really kind of neat. But anyway, thanks for sharing that with us. I'm going to get into some of these pictures you sent me. If you don't mind, I'd like for you to tell the audience what we're looking at here. But I think it's safe to say that there is shoddy work in Alaska too. Is that correct, or is that incorrect? So
you are 100% right on that one. It's a plague. It's hard to get people to pay attention to detail and understand the importance of making sure that things like vapor barriers and insulation are done correctly. I mean, you see all those studies out there about insulation. You know, if you got a half-inch gap between the bats all the way around an entire length of area, you've lost this much R value and all that. It's huge.
Yeah.
You know, things need to be installed properly. Continuity.
Well, this picture right here is the first one I'm going to bring up.
Yeah, the fold of the corner. That's one of the larger mistakes we see. They bring that plastic to a corner and they have all this leftover plastic because, you know, now you're bringing two sides to a 90 and they just fold it. They'll use the acoustical sealant properly on, you know, maybe on the foundation on some of them, but they leave that big old fold there. And that's just a huge air leak. The whole point is to have, you know, a continuous seal. And they mess up those corners and make them a big, huge air leak. And that was just a classic one where they, you know, I call it the teardrop, where they just do the fold inward, seal it against the foundation, and then there's your leak. Sometimes you see it where they just ball all that plastic up and they shove it down there in the corner and just put goop all over it, and it doesn't work. There's an art to cutting the plastic and sealing it and making the corners work.
Well, the next one I'm showing right now is basically just a straight line where the adhesive had failed and then the plastic is falling away from the foundation wall. By the way, this adhesive is black. Can you tell us what they're using here?
That's that acoustical sealant.
Okay.
Yeah, it's got a trade or a industry name of Black Death, which is, I don't know why they call it that other than it's like cheese on a nice hot pizza when it's everywhere. It's very difficult to use it and not get it all over everything. But it's basically tar in a caulking tube.
Okay.
But it's a forever elastic. You know, it doesn't harden. So the one photo it was showing, it was just falling away from the foundation. And again, they're not keeping the plastic. I don't want to say tension because you don't want tension on the Black Death, but they're not keeping the plastic tidy, if you will. And they're using not enough of the sealant, and so the plastic and the foundation don't have the ability to bond together, and it just falls apart. And then that, unless you're looking at the one, or you look the photo that goes down the foundation quite a ways, shows
yeah. Now I'm looking at the footer where you got like the footer with it looks like hydrostatic pressure on that block wall.
Yeah, look at all of the debris on that footing,
and
then it's wet, and they just put the sealant right over the top of it. So basically you're sealing to a bunch of debris that's not adhered to the footing. And so there you can see you just grab the plastic and it just falls away. I mean, that's, again, it's not paying attention to the need to have that sealed. If you're trying to stop moisture, air transfer with moisture into the crawl space from pressures from the earth, and you don't get it properly sealed, it's going to find that hole and you're going to get, you know, higher pressure coming through that one hole.
Do any of them ever use mechanical fasteners in these jobs, or are you mainly just using sealant, the Black Death sealant for these things?
There's a combination of the two when you get into a situation where you're going to have stress on the plastic in any way, because that sealant doesn't have tensile strength, if you will. You know, if you hook the plastic to something and the plastic is pulling, it's going to sit there and stretch that sealant until it pops it loose.
Gotcha.
So there are times we use treated 2x2s or something like that, and they'll wrap the plastic in that above the sealant and nail those to the concrete, and that helps the sealant hold.
And then of course this picture where they just completely ran out of sealant, and then they were just done.
Crawl space I was in yesterday, the last 12 feet, I would say, the tube was laying there, it was empty, and they left the job. Now they did this a couple months ago. I just happened to be in there yesterday. But I guess, you know, when you're out of supplies, job's over, I guess.
So real quick, was this near the door where you go into the crawl space, or was this in some back corner somewhere where they thought the homeowner would never be?
A third of the way to the back, very back, or 2/3 of the way to the very back corner.
Yeah.
It was a jog in the building foundation right there, right towards the back. So it looked like they had went to the very back corner and started and did the whole clockwise all the way around, but then they ran out right there, so they didn't continue.
So good advice. check the work. All right. Ask the contractor to show you pictures of everything or do a video or something. If you can't get down in the crawl space to see it,
Yeah.
ask them to show you proof. It's got to happen.
The owner gal told me after I called her, she said she paid $6,000 to have that baby barrier installed in that crawl. It says 8,000 square foot crawl space. She paid $6,000 to have that installed.
So what was her what was the reason why she called you? Just to check their work, or was there something that she started noticing is why she had you out?
It's a landlord tenant situation. And
Oh,
I was there for that, and the crawl space course is under the tenant's unit. So I had to go down there, and then I just started finding all these things and documenting it all for the landlord.
I got you. All right, last one. This is my favorite. This is the mushrooms. Please tell us about this one.
Odor investigation. The complaint was that they smelled what they believed to be something in relationship to mold, mushrooms, in their dining room. And it was actually the mother and father that had come to visit and complained about it. Well, apparently the wife has been complaining to the husband or whatever for quite some time about a smell, and the husband doesn't smell the smell. So it's, one of those domestic situations. But then mom and pa show up and they're like, this dining room stinks. And so I got called in and I went down in the crawls. I could kind of smell it, but I wasn't sure what it was. And when I opened that crawl space hatch, I was like, that is a horrible smell. And then as I got down there, it was obvious. I mean, you could move around in the crawl space and it was less odor, more odor, the hotter, colder thing you used to play as kids. Well, I was doing that in the crawl space, and it took me right over underneath that dining room. And there's those mushrooms, and they were, I guess, rotting. It's that time of year. They're falling over and turning to slime. And it was, I don't know that I've ever smelled anything like that before. Cat urine skunk combination, maybe. It was bad. And so there was a lot of other stuff. You can see the condition of that crawl space. It needs a ton of work. But yeah, that was pretty definitive to what their smell was.
It looks like they've also got non-pressure treated wood sitting directly on the dirt. Is that not?
Not so bad right there in that picture. You can see where the moisture is kind of touching it, but around the corner to the left of that picture, heading out into the kitchen area, under the kitchen area, literally their skirting is non-treated boards with foam on the backside of them. And I don't know what's on the outside because it's all buried. I'm assuming it's treated plywood. And the non-treated boards, the bottom 3 to 5, 6 inches is literally gone.
Wow.
You just can't do that. This poor gal bought this house a couple of years ago, and it's just been these kinds of things one after the other. And she had it inspected, but I saw the inspection report, very poor, very
right.
poor, and very sad situation for her, because now she's going to have to fork out a whole bunch of money to bring this house up to something that she could sell without, killing her conscience or getting caught having to fix a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. You gotta also make sure you vet those inspectors.
We have a saying around here. There's 2 types of inspectors. There's buyers inspectors and there's realtors inspectors. That's our saying. And if you want a buyer's inspector when you're having a house inspected.
That's right.
You don't want it. And the other part of that is that we say if the realtor gives you a list of 4 inspectors, those are the first 4 you don't call.
Right.
You look for somebody else that you can find and vet, and do it that way. So
that's
so
great.
there's some realtors, but it's something we deal with a lot. You asked about our heating systems, and I'd say it's 75% forced air here locally, and the rest are mostly boilers. Until you get in that outskirts area, it's mostly, everybody refers to them as Toyo stoves, but there's multiple brands. Toyo's just a brand. It's mostly what we call space heaters. So there's a stove in the living room, and there might be one in a back room or something like that. They're oil fed, they're propane fed, and they're, direct vent. We've had situations. I had a village I went to years ago. It was 54 houses we did. And in the late 90s, HUD had come in and put that Celatec or whatever it is, that black 1-inch high R value charcoal looking foam board with tinfoil on it.
Mm-hmm.
They had put it on the outside of their walls, and then they brought the roofs out just a little bit more and flashed around them. And then they put up new T111. And I was there in 2007 or 8, so like 10, 11 years later. And those places were completely rotted out. From the interior, when you cut out the drywall, you could just reach right through and just grab that foam board. It just turned the walls from double vapor barriers. It turned the walls into rainforests. And you mentioned 2x4s, correct? We don't do 2x4 construction here. It's all 2x6 or greater. And there's lots of houses that are double wall. There's all kinds of there's some concrete houses, but they have the offset double stud walls and all that with airspace in between. There's all kinds of energy stuff.
Right.
But those places were rotted out completely. And it's because of upgrades and practices that cause moisture to get trapped in the walls, because it's cold out there and it's warm and moist in here. And that's probably one of our bigger problems is condensation. Southeast Alaska, where I grew up, it's a rainforest. You know, the town I grew up in, I think it's 85 inches of rain a year, and it's one of the lowest ones down there. Ketchikan gets 160, 70, 80 inches of rain a year.
Wow.
They don't have nowhere near the mold problems that we have here in South Central. And yet we get 20, 15 or 20 inches of rain a year or something like that.
It's all because of that condensation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cold, hot. When they're going to meet somewhere, they have to. And that's where you get your water intrusion. And there's ice damming, there's other things, but something we didn't touch on, and I know this is an issue here, and I don't know if it is for you guys, man-made building materials. I get people a lot say, you know, well, I have a really old house, so it's probably moldy. Well, how old is your house? Well, it's built in the 70s. Well, probably not. You know, you got to put water to old materials, to the original, you know, the cut a tree down, build a house in, you know, mentality is you got to put water to wood to get mold. With the modern products, and not, you know, like there's the oriented strand boards, for instance, most of our work is crawl space, new construction, moldy subfloor, moldy floor joists. Not so much on the floor joists, mostly the subfloor. And that is very unfortunate because these guys are building these houses and they can't. The rain season is right now, and right now is when framing and roofing is really going fast because they need them closed in for cold season so they can finish them in the winter. So most of your houses are available in the spring, you know, the new construction.
Right.
Fortunately, majority of those homes, I'm willing to say a majority. Some guys have said 100%. I don't believe it's 100, but it's probably in the 70% plus range. Have moldy crawl spaces when the construction is complete.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is a plague that we are fighting here, something fierce, because those rains get that subfloor. And according to the American Plywood Association, I think it's 25% moisture content in the OSB, and it is structurally compromised and dimensionally compromised. And I see these subfloors at 30, 35%, you know, at 6 months after people moved in them.
Yeah.
You know, looking from the bottom, and they're just super moldy. And I don't know what the cure is. It's really hard to keep the rain off the subfloor when you've got 10 days or whatever worth of framing to do and roof sheathing. And then once you finally get that roof sheathing on, yeah, you're doing okay then for future rain, but you have a wet subfloor already. And to tell a builder, you know, now you need to stop when there's interest rates and, you know, there's costs associated with stopping, to tell them that you need to stop now and get that floor dry before the molds are, you know, too bad, and remediate what you have. It doesn't work.
Well, in our area, it's, you know, it sounds like you've got a real small window to get these things closed in. In our area, we don't. I've seen them framed for 6 to 9 months, you know, and then they'll put the Tyvek on it and all that. So it's absorbed, you know, and they don't put dehues in to dry them out, you know, or nothing. Next thing you know, the drywall goes on. I mean, it's like it's sat there framed for 6 months, and then it's drywalled with doors on it in like 2 weeks, you know, and it's like, holy cow, where's all that water trapped in that wood going to go? Because those, like you said, the contractor's not going to throw a dehu in there to dry that wood out before they start hanging drywall or anything like that. You got to be mindful of that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah. And our crawl space ventilation is a bathroom fan in a corner. We like to say the darkest, dankiest corner, if you can figure out what that is, as far away from heat sources as possible down there, with a humidistat switch running it set at about 45%.
Right.
And let it do its job. Now, a lot of errors are they put the switches over by the crawl space access so the humans can climb down there and the switch is nice and convenient. Sometimes that's 30, 40 feet between the switch and the fan. You can't do that.
Right.
That switch has to be at the fan so that when the humidity migrates over there and it kicks on and starts pulling humidity across the crawl space, that humidity is consistent until the air is dry, and then it goes out. You can't have that space in between. But these builders will say, and I hate it. I'm not dissing on builders, but a lot of them will say, well, I put that fan down there right away, and we ran an extension cord from the generator. We're controlling that moisture. No, that fan is designed to maintain a properly conditioned space. It is not designed to fix anything. That fan is for finished product, good to go, sealed vapor barrier, insulated warm space, for dripping water lines from cold lines, for natural migration of humidity from outside, things like that. That's what the fan is for. It is not a water damage correction tool. And so there's a lot of misconceptions there, and they think they're controlling the mold, or they'll take up one piece of subfloor over here, one piece of subfloor over there, and put some Walmart fans blowing down and across
Right.
when they think they're controlling it. You got floor joist pockets, or floor joists hanging down 8, 10, 12 inches. And all those pockets of floor joists, there's no air getting there, so you're not controlling mold growth. There's a lot of education involved to try and help them alleviate the mold growth if they can. That's almost impossible when you get the OSB wet.
Yeah, well, in our climate, we would have to use dehumidifiers, because if we use fans, we're just pulling 80% relative humidity in. It's not. It's different for you, and I just wanted to say that so that way, if somebody's watching and they live in Georgia, they don't have a bunch of fans running, because that's not going to do any good either. You got to use the tool for the climate, So just wanted to make sure that was clear. For somebody, hey, Michael Church said to put fans in, it'll dry the crawl space out. I'm like, no, that's not what I said. But anyway, all right.
Well, on the humidity thing, we have record humidity this year here. We're running about 60-65% outside. We have the highest rain. I think we have record rain season. This is just a wet year. I have houses that I've been still going into that have wet walls around windows and stuff from last year's winter ice damming, because it can't dry. It didn't dry itself out. Normally they do that, they dry, and people don't even notice it. But this year they're starting to smell. Right. They're getting the odors, and it's not normal to get that, but they can't dry. So I'm learning about the high humidity outdoor, like you guys have in the summertime. This is the first time we've ever experienced that in all the years I've been doing this.
And you said 60 to 65% is high humidity there. Is that what you said?
This time of year, yeah, that's really high.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll get it during the rainy day.
Right. That's 100% in the rain.
Yeah.
Right.
Usually there's sunshine for 3 or 4 or 5 days in between, and it dries everything back out. But we have unfortunately been plagued with a very heavy rain season, and our humidity hasn't come down at all, and our ground is saturated. So versus us, an average humidity for us is 70%. That's winter and summer. So in the summer we're 90% relative humidity, and in the winter we drop down to especially, but if you got fog, that's 100% humidity. So you really only got 40-50% humidity during certain parts of the day. Normally it's like noon till dark, and then once it gets dark, the humidity starts creeping in. You got fog to deal with and all that other stuff. So that our average is 70. So it's amazing that your high is 60 to 65. That's why you're using fans to dry out your crawl spaces, you don't need a dehumidifier. We're usually about 45-50 this time of year because the rain season's finally here. But that'll go down. But in the winter, it can get down. I've actually been at an inspection at a mine out in the middle of nowhere, north of Fairbanks. It was 6% humidity outside. And I was doing an assessment. They had water damage to the building that went through the bottom. So we had to go outside and under the building to, see what needed to be dealt with. And, you wear gloves, you do all these things, but it doesn't matter. You're going to get a lightning strike every time you get near one of the door handles, or, it's almost, you almost don't even want to open a door, because you're just going to get zapped.
Yeah.
It can get pretty dry in some of those environments, but they hang at 20, 30, 40 below for weeks and weeks and weeks. So it's all gone. It just froze out of the air. It's turning into frost, just laying around.
That's very interesting. Well, thanks again, Pat. I appreciate you coming on, and man, this is great information. I hope we didn't go too long. Maybe this might have to be 2 videos depending on how long it was, but anyway, let us know. We'd love to maybe have you back in the future. And if you guys need to get in touch with Pat, if you're in Alaska, I'm going to put his contact information down below for you. And again, thanks for being here, Pat. We hope you make it a happy and blessed day, and we'll see you later.
Yep. Thank you.